Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Michael Patmos. It is June the 20th, and I have a very important video today. I want to start off by sharing with you something that James Carville just uploaded a few hours ago. He is calling on folks in the White House, the staff, Donald Trump's staff, to begin leaking anything they can that is not classified about Donald Trump. His argument is that it's over for Trump, that his approval rating is beyond repair. The mess he has created in Iran is beyond repair. The economic damage is significant, and he is not going to recover his standing. He's it's over for him. And Carville actually goes on to predict that after the midterms, where the GOP gets trashed, Trump will be pushed aside, and by April next year, he won't even be a factor. He may not even still be in office. So Carville's argument is that for those who are on the Trump team in the White House, if they want to save their careers, be employable in the future, not go down in history as an obsequious sycophant, if they want to have any kind of future at all, they need to distance themselves from him right now, sooner the better. And he makes a very persuasive and a very compelling argument. If I were a Trump in the Trump White House right now, I think I would be having similar thoughts. I agree with Carville. I think what he's saying is absolutely correct. But I agree with him for yet another reason. As those of you who follow me know, I have been saying for quite some time now, over a year, that it is very obvious that Donald Trump has behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration. And for those of you who don't understand what frontotemporal degeneration is, I've included a lot of information below. If you look at my video on this, there's further links in that Substack, which will take you to other videos. If you go through all of them, you'll know more about behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration than most doctors do. So here's why it is important and why James Carville is right, having to do with the fact that the president has a neurodegenerative disorder. First of all, behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration is a degenerative disease of the frontal lobes where they connect to the temporal lobes. The disease is of unknown cause, although a fair percentage of patients with FTD appear to have a genetic predisposition, so it can be inherited, but there may be other reasons that people develop it that we don't know. It's not Alzheimer's disease, it's a different disorder than that. There is a deposition of abnormal proteins in the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes, in specific areas where they connect to the temporal lobes, begin to degenerate. The cells actually die, and the patient develops degeneration in this very important area of the brain. Now, there are many neurodegenerative disorders, but to a physician, you can distinguish the difference between them clinically. They're very different. To a layperson, you may not be able to tell the difference between Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, or vascular dementia and Pick's disease, or Pick's disease and Korsakoff psychosis, or Wernicke's encephalopathy, or some other form, Lewy body dementia. All these different neurodegenerative processes have sort of unique clinical presentations. And frontotemporal degeneration has a pretty unique, there are three variants of it, but the variant that is important is behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration. So let me tell you how that disease presents. I know because I've seen it. I've diagnosed it. I am, by the way, a board certified internal medicine physician. I'm not a neurologist. But I did 6 months of neurology in my internal medicine residency and practiced in private practice and still see patients to this day for over 45 years. I've seen 300,000 patients. And I did research in the 1980 and 81 on neurodegenerative disorders. I published a paper in Clinical Research in February 1981 on limbic anterograde transneuronal degeneration in hippocampal trauma. So I know a little bit about neurodegenerative disorders. I don't purport to be a neurologist, but for an internist, I know more about FTD than most internists do. So here's how it presents. First of all, the disease has a very long time frame. It can take 20, 30, 40 years for it to run its full course. In the beginning, it's very subtle. The manifestations are really just behavioral. And at the end, the patients do develop a significant dementia and often end up, in a nursing home needing, full-time care. But that can take decades to occur. The symptoms, signs and symptoms of behavioral variant FTD are very characteristic, and they include the following things. These patients are disinhibited. What that means is they say things that no one in their right mind would say. Sound familiar? They say socially inappropriate, offensive, stupid things, things that no one would say. They're just in a social context. You would never think of saying such a dumb thing. There's a classic example in the medical literature of a wife who brings her husband to the doctor because he keeps propositioning the clerk at the grocery store, in front of his wife. Things like that, things that just no one in their right mind would do. I don't know if you've seen, I mean, Trump has been doing this for years. He says things all the time that are just off the wall that no one would ever say. Things like he met with the president of Egypt and they fell in love. They absolutely fell in love. He describes the president of India as a beautiful looking man. Now, what president says those kinds of things? He calls people names all the time. He insults women, referring to their menstrual cycles. He just says the most awful, offensive things. That's disinhibition. That's a hallmark manifestation of behavioral variant FTD. If you see someone who's middle age or older who just blurts out ridiculous, inappropriate things in public, you have to wonder, whoa, that's not just bad manners. That could be a neurodegenerative disorder. In addition to disinhibition, they also have a a lack of empathy. They don't. They hurt people's feelings. They say things and do things that are that have no sense of compassion or empathy for others, and they have no insight into it. By the way, all of this, these patients have no insight into their deficits. They don't think they're saying things that are inappropriate. They don't think they're manifesting a lack of empathy. But family members will tell you he just doesn't. The patient just doesn't have any empathy for his own family members. They can also be very compulsive and perseverate. And perseveration means to do the same things or say the same things over and over and over again. Trump says the same things over and over and over again. But that perseveration can also have a kinetic or a motor component to it, not just a linguistic component. They don't just say things over and over again. They can't disconnect physically. For example, the sticky handshake that I've talked about before that Trump has, where he grabs a person's hand, shakes it, and he just won't let go. They have to pull their hand away. That's a classic manifestation of frontal lobe disease. So that's a kind of perseveration. There's also, very importantly, a lack of judgment. Patients when you don't have good normal frontal lobes intersecting with the temporal lobes, you can't make, you don't have proper judgment. These people will do things that are, you wonder, why on earth would anybody do that? So you have someone who says things that are off the wall and then does things that just don't make any sense at all. Why would they do that? Why would they say that? And then another thing with behavioral variant FTD is that they have significant on psychological testing. I mean, talk about not just a MOCA test or a you know a simple screening, for the MMPI, or not the MMPI, but the other simple screening tests for dementia. Um, I'm talking about a formal neuropsychological assessment. They have very significantly impaired executive function. What what does that mean, impaired executive function? Well, what that means is that they can't think through problems and make appropriate choices and plan for how to execute things. If you were to ask a patient with advanced frontotemporal degeneration to do a complex series of tasks. They can't execute on that. They get stuck. So all of these things are plainly evident in the president. He says and blurts out ridiculous things. He does ridiculous things. He clearly has no sense of compassion. He has no awareness or insight at all into his abnormal behavior. Um, he has the sticky handshake. He perseverates, and he has problems with executive function. That's you know, going to war with Iran without a plan, without a strategy, disregarding all of the recommendations made to him by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and General Kane, who said, "Don't do this. Don't do this. Iran is going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz." Exactly what they did. And he said, "Nah, they won't do that." Well, they did. And now we know that he who holds the strait is the winner. So, and it's not over yet. So, even with the memorandum of understanding, this thing is still going on. Iran just today closed the Strait of Hormuz again. So those are all examples. If you step back and you look at bvFTD, behavioral variant FTD, it's evident. I mean, if you're not a doctor, you may not recognize this, but if I'm speaking to other physicians in this audience, this is a very obvious diagnosis. If you know this disease, you can recognize it like that. This is simple, obvious, is clearly behavioral variant FTD. There's just no question about it. It's an obvious diagnosis to any doctor who's experienced in neurodegenerative disorders. Now, I think he's being treated for it, by the way, because he has the bruise on his hand all the time, covered with makeup. He's obviously trying to hide something. He's been going to the doctor 3 times in the past year, 22 specialists. He's clearly getting treatment. If it's for bvFTD, there is no approved treatment for that disease. So whatever he's getting is experimental. There are some experimental treatments. There are some monoclonal antibodies and some other things that are being tried. So he's obviously getting some kind of treatment through intravenously, and which these treatments all, by the way, have significant potential side effects, and because he's covering it up with his hand. So I think he has bvFTD and he's being treated and he's hiding it. And I think it's obvious, it's an obvious diagnosis, and it's playing out right before our very eyes. The ridiculous decision he made to go to war without any kind of a plan, exit strategy, didn't think through things, and now the whole world is in a mess. Now, here's where it links back to James Carville. Carville says that the White House staff needs to start leaking because they need to save themselves. Well, I think that's true. But you need to save yourself not just for saving yourself. You need to save yourself to save the country. How can any American be comfortable with the notion that they have a president of the United States whose brain is rotting in a specific area? Now, they may look okay on the surface, they may seem like they're intact. Memory isn't necessarily particularly affected in this disease until the late stages. It's all about behavior and judgment and executive function. That's what's wrong with these patients. It's behavior, judgment, and executive function. So if I'm right, and he has bvFTD, we have a president of the United States who has a degenerative neurological disorder involving the temporal and the frontal lobes, who has abnormal behavior, lacks judgment, and impaired executive function, who's in charge of the nuclear codes. Now, apparently, rumor has it that people around the White House are kind of trying to control him a little bit. They obviously have to know. People closest to him have to know that this is what he has, or what there's something wrong with him. They must know. Vance must know. Todd Blanche must know. Susie Wiles must know. There have to be lots of people in the White House who know that Donald Trump is really sick and it's a neurodegenerative process. How can they, in good conscience, allow this country to be run by someone who has a neurodegenerative disorder, who can't think, has no judgment, and can't execute and make proper rational decisions? Look at the trouble he has gotten us into now. It's evident. So I think for the good of the country, it's important that he has to be removed. This is a medical condition that renders him uh, incapable of, and unfit to be in the role. For the sake of the country, he needs to be removed from office. Take out the politics. I don't agree with his politics. Take that out. I don't agree with his pre-morbid personality. He was always kind of a jerk as far as I'm concerned. I'm talking about this just as one man with a neurodegenerative disorder who has the reins of power. This is a very dangerous time, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. He could continue to make bad decisions and execute poorly on those bad decisions and say and do things that are offensive and that don't make sense, that get us in even deeper trouble than we're in right now. For the good of the country, for the safety of the country, it is imperative he be removed from office. I hope this message gets to folks in Congress and they start taking action about this. Now, here's a very simple thing we could do. His MRI will refute or confirm the idea. If he has clinically he has bvFTD, if there's an MRI done, it should show degeneration in those areas of the brain, in the frontal and temporal areas. There's a specific characteristic pattern. A good neuroradiologist can recognize this. Trump's MRI needs to be released. It needs to be read by outside independent neuroradiologists. Now, you might say, well, but wait a second, there's HIPAA precautions and all this other stuff. That's true. But this is a special circumstance. He's the president of the United States. And, although he is entitled to some degree of privacy, if he has a neurodegenerative disorder that makes him unable to execute the role and the duties of president, and he is dangerous and placing the country and indeed the world in harm's way, then he needs to be removed for the good of the country. And you, who work in the White House, you folks who know what's going on and are staying silent, you're complicit in this. And I think Carville is right. This is all going to, Trump is falling apart. He's not going to last much longer. He may get sick in the next few weeks or months. He may die of an adverse reaction from one of these medications. He's going to get trounced in November and be pushed aside. Either way, the Trump train is off the tracks and it's going down. Um, you got trouble ahead, trouble behind. Casey Jones, you better jump that train now. Now is the time. Carville is right. The sooner you do this, the better for the country and the better for yourself, because you may have gotten caught up in it early on, and it was a job, and it was exciting to be in the White House. You're working for a president who won an election and won the electoral college and all that. But it's evident now there's something very, very, very wrong with this man, and he's getting the country in trouble. It's time for you to stand up and be a patriot and do the right thing. So I agree with James Carville, and I am imploring you to do the right thing. And I hope this message gets to someone in Congress. We have got to see this man's MRI. If his MRI shows what I am sure it will show, then he has a severe degenerative neurological disorder that ruins the brain in particular areas that have to do with thinking, judgment, actions, words, and executive function. You can't have a president who's impaired in that way. You can have a president with polio who can't walk. You can have a president who has high cholesterol or some other or back problems. You can have a president with varicose veins like Nixon had. You can't have a president who has behavioral variant FTD and has impaired judgment, thinking, and executive function. That puts the country at risk. Put country over personal agenda. Do the right thing, and let's get this man out of office.